WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide, and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Hey folks, welcome to Flashpoint here inside the WCNC Charlotte app. I'm Ben Thompson here with Julie Kay. This past week, major Charlotte news, one of the biggest stories we followed in recent memory, and that is the local regional transportation authority basically scrapping plans for the I-77 toll lanes that have been in the works now for years. Billions of dollars already spent. Now a no-go.
I mean, I am like at a loss for words. We were here last week speaking to Councilman Ed Driggs, and you know, we had anticipated some vote like this might happen, but even he was like, I don't expect it to happen until June. This was added to the agenda last minute, and they overturned it. And now the project is essentially dead. We're still waiting at this point. I know this is going to air on Sunday. Today is Thursday for us. Yeah. So we'll get some more, hopefully, reaction from the state, which is really what we're needing to see. From council members, but I mean, that is just, it's a bombshell.
It really was a bombshell. There's no better word for it. So yeah, at this point, we're trying to figure out what comes next. A person sort of at the center of that, of this whole thing is Shannon Benz. He's the executive director, founder of Sustain Charlotte, one of several community groups that have been leading the charge against the toll lanes from day one. Take a listen to our interview. Joining us now, Shannon Benz with Sustain Charlotte. Shannon, thanks for coming on. Good to see you again.
Great to be here.
A big week for your organization. You have lobbied hard and fought the good fight against the toll lanes, and it looks like that your organization, among others, has won this fight. The toll lanes are not going to go forward. You said to me earlier you thought that this was an example of democracy at work. What would you say to folks, though, who were more skeptical and be like, this seems like this was mismanaged from day one by a variety of parties across the government. This was not an example of good democracy. What would you tell them?
Well, I think both are true. I think it was mismanaged, particularly by the state, DOT. There were other responsible parties, I would say, but ultimately there was a lack of transparency from NCDOT. I think there were some other elected officials who perhaps knew more than they let on. But it was a win for democracy in my mind, because ultimately the people of Charlotte were heard. And that doesn't always happen. In fact, that unfortunately rarely happens in Charlotte, you know, historically, and I think present day. Often it is the special interests, particularly the business interests in Charlotte, who win the day in these kinds of fights. But, you know, people came together starting last November when the preliminary designs showing exactly where this road would go and how harmful it would be were finally released by NCDOT. And for 7 months, the community's been saying, we do not want this. We do not want to be a city that further divides people from each other. We want reconnection. And eventually the message got through, but only because people continued to show up over and over and over again. You know, parents came after work, they got sitters to speak and show up and hold signs at elected officials' meetings, at government meetings. And that is what democracy in action looks like. And it's unfortunate it took 7 months to convince our elected leaders to listen to those who elected them. But ultimately, they did, and that's why I said to you earlier, I think this is a big win for democracy.
Yeah, but the thing is, you say 7 months, but it's been years that we've known that these toll lines were talked about. As far as back as 2014, it was first brought up, but I realized it was not on anybody's radar. But at least going back 3 or 4 years, people have talked about this. I mean, I even though I don't cover this on a regular basis, I remember seeing it and thinking, oh gosh, this is not going to go over well. Full transparency, I live in one of the neighborhoods mainly affected by this, so it's I see it in our neighborhood newsletter all the time. I'm very aware of it. And I knew, so you talk about the state DOT, but I also think about city and some of the regional folks that should have known this was coming down the pike and should have known that this was going to be a delicate situation and negotiation. Do you feel like this was doomed from the start?
Yeah, so let me talk about that nuance there. So yes, our regional transportation planning organization, CARTPO as it's called, did request this project and submitted this project for funding to the state, to DOT, right? So DOT in very much, in many ways, you could say, was just responding to what this region asked for. However, DOT also, going back to the 2000s, have said to our region, the only way we can relieve congestion on 77 is by adding more lanes, which would then became adding toll lanes that were going to be publicly funded. And then because the cost of this project became so expensive, eventually the state said there is no way these toll lanes will ever get built unless we essentially make them private, essentially ask the private sector to pay and manage and collect tolls on these lanes for the next 50 years, just like on I-77 North. So that's sort of the evolution, and really I think the fundamental problem, and this is where I do think NCDOT holds a lot of responsibility, is, you know, they did this study in, I think it's 2007, called the Fast Lane Study, right? And they've used that study and the decision made in 2007 to build more lanes as the basis for what they were trying to do here in 2026. Never has state DOT said, hey, as your transportation agency, state transportation agency, we think there are lots of ways to relieve congestion. We're going to look at all of those, and we're going to inform you, our elected officials, on what your options are, benefits and costs of all of these different ways to reduce congestion, so you can make an informed decision. That's what never happened. The options given to our state elected, or our local elected officials, was we can build toll lanes or we can build toll lanes. And in the most recent sort of ultimatum given to our elected officials was we can either build these toll lanes by doing a P3, right, a public-private partnership, or we can not build them at all, because we, the state, don't have enough money, given this is going to cost, billions of dollars. So, there was always this sort of false choice, right? It wasn't a, hey, we could do all of these different things, maybe in combination. It was, if you want to relieve congestion on 77, we have one solution, and it's a privately owned and operated toll lane. So when, if you're an elected official and you're told by your state transportation agency that's your only choice, and something needs to be done about 77, you can kind of understand why they would say, well, okay, if that's our only choice, we know we have to do something. And so they took NCDOT at their word. That was the only way. And unfortunately, right up through last night's vote, NCDOT has continued to say the only thing we will spend this $600 million on is a road that includes widening it with toll lanes, right? They were unwilling to allow that funding to be used for any other congestion relief strategy other than toll lanes, right?
So we know toll lanes is not going to happen. So
it seems like unlikely to happen at this point.
So what now? You now got to get buy-in by the state, by the business community, as you say, by city leaders, by regional leaders as well. So what's the plan?
So this gives us an opportunity to do, again, what should have been done years and years ago, in which is what other cities typically do, which is to say, let's look at best practices from around the country and around the world and see what actually works, what actually reduces congestion, or at least slows congestion in a growing city. We are not the first city to face this problem, right? Every major city in the world, particularly in the US, has faced this exact same problem. And some cities are addressing it better than others. And the cities that are addressing it better than others are not relying on widening their roads in order to solve the problem. The most effective cities have invested in fast, reliable, safe mass transit, because you can only fit so many people in their own car in a given space. And in urban areas, that space is limited.
What do you say to folks, though, that say it shouldn't be either or? As in, you're talking about study after study has proven that induced demand happens when it comes to you add 5 lanes. Well, within a few years, there'll be 5 more lanes of cars on that interstate. You add 10 more lanes. It just is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and just more traffic comes, and it never really gets genuinely
that's what happens,
better. So there's that, but there's also the reality of Charlotte as it is today, and our transit system, and the challenges it faces, even though it looks like it's in a better position than it was certainly a year ago, and that it is in fact moving forward. Why can it be both and instead of either or?
It can be both and. But the reality is we only have one of those options right now, and that's driving. We need to add the other side of the and, right? So that people have choices. That's what we're lacking in Charlotte, is choices. For a lot of people, really the only reliable, convenient option is to drive, which is very burdensome for everyone, right? Particularly people with the least disposable income. Transportation is the most expensive form of transportation is a personal vehicle. It's the second highest household cost after housing, and it's a pretty close second. Most people don't add up all the different expenses they have related to owning their own vehicle. Particularly, most households with more than one person have more than one vehicle. They'll often have one vehicle per adult because we don't give people choices other than driving. So yes, it needs to be both and. The problem is it's not both and, it's only driving as our real choice right now.
Specifically for that section of I-77, what does that public transit solution look like in your ideal situation?
So in the immediate term, what we could do for a fraction of the $4.3 billion it would have cost to add 4 toll lanes to 11 miles of 77, for a fraction of that, we could just reallocate existing pavement to prioritize high occupancy vehicles, which is just a technical word that means a vehicle with more than 2 people in it, right? 3 people, 4 people, and ideally a bus, right? And so what that just means is you dedicate a lane, at least one lane, to people that are in vehicles with 3 or more people. And then when you do that, you give people who are doing that in those types of vehicles an unconstrained a lane, right? A lane without traffic, a lane without congestion, so they are able to actually go the speed limit and get to where they're going, very quickly. They're often called dedicated bus lanes. We could do that literally within months. We don't need to build really anything. It's a signage issue, it's a paint issue, it's a communication issue. There would be some infrastructure needed, but relatively little. In fact, the other thing we should be looking at is bus on shoulder. Many cities, San Diego, Chicago, Minneapolis, and more, use what's called bus on shoulder, which allows buses, city buses, to use the shoulder when the speed limit or when the speed of travel slows down. Basically, when the road gets more congested, people in buses, the buses are able to use the shoulder to bypass traffic, right? That could be done here.
Do you think that there is support for what you're talking about currently among some of those stakeholders we talked about regional, about the business community, among city council, about DOT? Are they? You have this conversation with them? Do you hear receptive people?
I don't think a conversation has really been had about that because, again, the conversation has been entirely about, do you want us to build you toll lanes or not? There hasn't been a conversation about, hey, we could do toll lanes, or we could do a bus on shoulder lane, or we could reallocate an existing lane, travel lane for high occupancy vehicles, or, there's a range of things. And what we've been asking for in our coalition of over 20 local community-based organizations, what we've been asking DOT and the city to do together since the beginning of December, when DOT first asked for public comment on their plan, we have said, we want you to study all the options do a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis. Be transparent about that analysis so we can all know what our options are and make informed decisions about the best way to move forward. That's what we've been asking for from the beginning, and that's what we believe needs to happen now.
What we saw last night was so last minute, in a sense, of like, it was added to the agenda at the last second. I know that there have been conversations about it prior to, about when that was going to happen. But, I mean, we saw so many people come together. The mayors came together. Of course, Charlotte had the majority of those votes there. But what do you think that conversation looks like now, given that vote separates Charlotte a bit from the General Assembly? I know there's still conversations about what that means for that funding, but that definitely puts a bit of a space between the city of Charlotte, the surrounding area, and the state government.
Well, let me take those one at a time. First of all, what was really, I think, exciting about last night in terms of this issue is that every one of the towns in Mecklenburg County voted to rescind this project. Every municipality in Mecklenburg County, including the county, and of course the city, all of the town's representatives voted to rescind. So it was a unified decision within Mecklenburg County. It was disappointing that there was only one vote outside of Mecklenburg County from representatives from the Union County and Iredell County communities who voted to rescind. So there was a divide between Mecklenburg County and the surrounding counties. That was unfortunate. That was disappointing. I do want to give a shout out to the mayor of Monroe, who did vote with Mecklenburg County and the city and the towns of Mecklenburg. But the others really said they needed more time. But the reality is there has been a lot of time to consider this. We have known, we don't really have any new information now that we didn't have 7 months ago. The information, the options are still the same, toll lanes or not. And so, we are really, we really applaud all of the elected officials in Mecklenburg County who were there last night, who stood up for a better future for Mecklenburg County, right? I mean, I believe NCDOT with this toll lane project has been looking backwards, adding highway lanes, toll lanes. That is a 20th century solution. Urban areas have learned that does not solve the problem. It only kicks the can down the road at an enormous cost to taxpayers. So, that's the good news. The good news here is that our county leaders heard what the community wanted, and they represented that vision for Charlotte that reconnects so much of our city that was and remains divided because of decisions made in the 1960s, that these neighborhoods, historically black neighborhoods that have existed in Charlotte for generations, did not matter enough. That the people in those neighborhoods did not matter enough to put 77 somewhere else. And this happened all over the country. Urban freeways, the interstates that go through our cities, including Charlotte, go through the black neighborhoods. And we need to reconcile with that. We need to reckon that, and we need to reconcile that. And that means doing everything we can today, both the city and the state, to reconnect these neighborhoods that were broken and still suffer daily in terms of their quality of life because of that decision made in the 1960s. They inhale dirtier air than people in the rest of the city. They are subjected to noise constantly, 24 hours a day, by living next to a freeway. I've had, residents in McCrory Heights say, I used to be able to go out on my front porch. I remember going out on my front porch before 77 was built, and I could talk to my neighbor on their front porch. We haven't been able to do that in decades because it's too loud, right? And so we have an opportunity to repair the damage that was done by those who came before us, right? We don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. We can repair, we can reconnect, and everybody wins when we do that, right? Everybody wins when we repair and reconnect, because we rise as a community and as a people when everyone rises, not just some.
Okay, that sounds good. And as I say, I know this personally, and I know very well exactly what you're talking about. And some people will scoff at the idea or say that you're woke because you say the interstate system is racist and the way it was built. The fact of the matter is, that's what happened.
It's well documented.
It's well documented.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is not a controversial take. It's what happened, unfortunately.
Well, just look at the map of Charlotte.
Totally.
We have not just 77, 85, 74, all of our highways. Where do they go?
They did not go through Myers Park.
They did not go through South Charlotte.
That's not debatable. Right. However, my point here is that you are, and your sort of group of people are going to have to deal with a Republican General Assembly. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality.
Well, that's nothing new, right? That's nothing new. We've been dealing with a Republican General Assembly who is fighting Charlotte on just about every issue for a very long time. I don't think that should prevent us from working towards the vision that we have and working towards the quality of life that we need. We should not accept less than what we want in order to appease the General Assembly. Right? I mean, I understand the political reality, but I think when we start lowering our standards and agreeing to lower our quality of life just to get the support of Raleigh, we are doing an injustice to ourselves and to future generations. A lot of people were wringing their hands from the surrounding counties last night about, quote unquote, losing $600 million from the state. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But not receiving $600 million for a project that hurts our people, makes us a less attractive place to live for many, many people, locks us into 50 years of tolls that most people can't afford, is not losing anything. It's gaining far more, because what we would pay in the long term in order to have that $600 million far exceeds $600 million. We would be paying billions in tolls for the road, first of all, and that doesn't even begin to quantify the cost to our quality of life of having a wider road further divide our city.
But say what you want, that was a plan and it was playing out. What we have now is not a plan. So what do you say to people who say, okay, well that plan certainly wasn't ideal, and no, I don't like toll lanes, but we need to do something. I-77 is getting worse by the day. I know you talk about bus lanes, using the shoulder, things like that. Transit, all a big part of this. But who takes the lead now? Are you expecting DOT to take the lead in this now? Are you expecting the city to take? Are you expecting CRTPO to take the?
Yeah.
You guys going to take the? Who takes the lead now?
So many hands in this.
Yeah, this is like a hot potato now. Who takes it?
So the way this has worked in other cities, and again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, right? So many cities have been where we are. In fact, in 2019, Austin was in this exact same place. Texas DOT had proposed to widen Interstate 35 through the heart of Austin, right? Interstate 35, like Interstate 77, was built to separate East Austin, where their community of color, their black neighborhoods were, and downtown Austin. Fast forward to 2019, Texas DOT proposed to do the same thing, to widen that road with toll lanes, further dividing East Austin from downtown. The response from the community was exactly the same as the response here. People said, we don't want this. This is not who we are. We want to reconnect our neighbors to our neighbors. We don't want to be further divided from them. That forced, they rejected toll lanes. That forced Texas DOT also back to the drawing board. And then what happened in Austin was their Downtown Business Alliance. The Downtown Business Alliance in Austin led a study to look at lowering the freeway in downtown and building a cap over the top. Again, something dozens of cities have now done or in the works to do. The Downtown Business Alliance led the study, but it was a very collaborative effort where everyone is playing a role. When I say everyone, I mean the city of Austin is obviously a partner. They're chipping in financially. The state, Texas DOT, is paying for and leading the project to lower Interstate 35 in their downtown. So that's their role. They're taking their road and they're paying to lower it, which is the most expensive part, I'll add. Lowering the freeway is the most expensive part. Texas DOT agreed to do that. NCDOT, we hope, will do that here because, well, I'll get to in a minute all the benefits to the state of doing that. So the city chips in. The federal government had committed to help fund this project. My understanding is those federal funds have now been pulled back because we have an administration who doesn't believe we should be funding anything other than moving cars. That's their new policy. And so, they're running into some challenges given that the feds pulled back. So they're now having to scale back their original ambition. They were going to do multiple freeway caps in downtown Austin.
I wasn't even going to get to the federal lawmakers in this, but you just complicated this conversation. now we got to worry about the federal lawmakers, which is, I know that's a whole other.
Can of
worms. Yeah, can of worms.
Well, the federal government fortunately changes fairly often. The pendulum typically swings right from left to right and right to left. So, there is likely a future in which we will have a government in Washington, D.C. who is more supportive of public transit.
Especially given how long this might take to pull off.
Right. It's not like we need the feds funding next year or the year before. From the time that Austin rejected their state's plan to widen and build toll lanes in downtown Austin to today, it was 7 years. It took them 7 years to come up with a new plan, right? And to get all the partners, all the stakeholders working together, right? And now they're slated to start construction, I believe, this year or next year. I think it got delayed a little bit, so it may not be now until next year. But they are ready to start breaking ground. And yes, they had to restart their planning process, but now they are going to have a freeway that is buried, reconnecting East Austin to downtown Austin through parks, greenways, sidewalks, bike paths, public space where people can connect with one another, not a freeway that divides them. And we can do that in Charlotte.
Transformative.
Transformative.
Absolutely transformative.
It's been transformative. Been in every city that has done this.
What? Because I'm genuinely interested. I'm familiar with the Austin I-35, project, but I guess I don't know the details to the extent that you do. What does that mean for traffic if they went instead from toll lanes and expanding traffic to now putting this underground? What has it done? I understand what it does cap and stitch, what it does for the neighborhoods, the value obviously there, but what does it do for traffic? Has this in any way addressed the congestion?
Yeah. So, the freeway is still going to exist, of course, but below these caps. There are parts of that freeway they are still widening. They are widening parts of 35 further from downtown Austin. And they are looking at other ways to reduce congestion as well. They're now not simply looking at, I believe they have some bus rapid transit or some dedicated bus lanes. But at the end of the day, the point is that multiple governments came together, led by the Downtown Business Alliance, who, by the way, has been our Downtown Business Alliance, Charlotte Center City Partners, has been completely silent on this issue, even though this will have a massive negative impact, toll roads that would be on downtown. And the upside of doing what we're talking about, lowering and capping the freeway, would unlock so much developable land that is currently undevelopable because of the acreage that freeways and the Belk and the Brookshire interchanges take to have these figure 8 cloverleaf ramps wastes an enormous amount of incredibly valuable land. This is some of our most valuable land on a per acre basis in our entire city. And instead of generating property tax revenue to help fund services that we need, we are getting zero tax revenue on that land. By the way, that used to be land we did generate tax revenue on until the 1960s, when the state of North Carolina took that property by eminent domain. The city and county lost property taxes in perpetuity on all of that land that was taken for this freeway. And not this county and city was never compensated, right? And there's been estimates now done by a professor at Southern Methodist in Texas. He's looked at 42 cities where freeways were built through them. And he's estimated the loss of tax revenue, the economic cost to those cities of those decisions. He's done this for Charlotte. I don't want to misquote the number.
Yeah.
But let me just say this. We are losing millions of dollars, millions, every single year in property taxes that we would be collecting if this land had been allowed to develop like all the surrounding parcels instead of building 77. So there's a real cost that is far more than $600 million that we are suffering from every year by the very existence of this road at ground level.
Well, guys, this is going to be an interesting couple weeks and months.
Couple weeks.
Couple years, couple
Couple
decades.
years. Yeah.
I'm-
To your point, though, I don't think people don't think about it because we're in our cars, but those clover leaves take up so much room.
So much space.
I remember just probably 12, 15 years ago when they took back some of the land there in Uptown, I think south and McDowell, where the Whole Foods is in Uptown, because there was a big loop there, and they took out some of that there, and there's now an apartment building, and the hotel and the apartment at Whole Foods, above Whole Foods, is across from NASCAR. And by doing that, by shrinking the interchange, it gave them that, land that was developable and usable, and just on a small
Well, that
scale.
reminds me. So we have actually studied, the city looked into, and a consultant actually designed a cap for 277 between Uptown and South End. So there's a design floating around out there that a consultant did some years ago of a cap, exactly what we're talking about, but over 277, where the freeway is already lowered, right? So that would be an even easier cap to build because the freeway wouldn't need to be lowered. The adjacent land Uptown and South End is already higher than the freeway, right? If you can picture that.
Yeah.
So we could be building a cap there and have those same benefits, unlock more developable land that's currently consumed by clover leaves. So I think the exciting thing is we have so much opportunity as a city to do things with land that, to create land, use land for a higher and better purpose, right? That better connects our communities, serves our people, generates tax revenue, increases walkability, all the things that we have in our visionary documents as a city, right? We've passed a vision for our city in recent years, called the 2040 plan, right? We have visions and goals, and not building toll lanes and looking at things like we're talking about, lowering and capping freeways, can help us realize these visions. And the return on investment is huge. Let me say that again. The return on investment in dollars and cents is huge. Because again, and we have a design that a local designer did. We shared these recently with the county commission. He looked at all the parcels of land that could be developed where just the 77 Belk interchange is currently. And if we actually if we actually developed that land that would be unlocked by lowering 77 below ground, the amount of tax revenue that the development would generate would cover very quickly the cost of building that cap. And that would be tax revenue that we generate from those properties in perpetuity. And with toll lanes, there is no ROI in terms of dollars and cents. It's not an investment that then generates revenue for your city. It only costs your city every year in lost revenue.
All right. Shannon, I think we've talked about this for the three viewers still with us at this point. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, seriously, that's what we love about this show, is that we can go deeper into some of these things. And listen, I think you've got your work cut out for you.
We're going to need a lot of help, and I hope everyone listening knows they can be part of this exciting solution for our city. It's really a chance to reconnect and repair damage that was not done by us. That was done by people who lived here a long time ago, who maybe at the time some of them didn't know what we know today. But we don't have to live in the past. We don't have to make the same mistakes. We can learn from those mistakes. And if we do this together, just like many of us came together to stop toll lanes and ask for a better future, we can do that. We can continue to do that. And to the extent we come together as a community, we can do big things and become the city we want to be.
All right. Shannon Benz with Sustain Charlotte. Shannon, thank you. Come back and keep us updated.
Do.
All right. More Flashpoint after this.
All right, welcome back to Flashpoint here inside the WCNC Charlotte mobile app. Other big news this week, the budgets. Everyone's working on their budgets. City, county, goodness gracious, it's been a lot of meetings for me. But something inside the budget, in the city budget, that I wanted to pay attention to was raises across the board is the big conversation. 4% proposed for city employees, 7% proposed for firefighters, 10% proposed for CMPD. If you look closer, though, the percentage raises for city council members and for the mayoral seat is a lot different. So this is my package from this week.
In a $4.5 billion city budget proposal, Kay Ortiz says the real impact is between the lines.
If we didn't do our job, you wouldn't be able to turn your water on, you wouldn't be able to flush your toilet. Firefighters wouldn't be able to fight fires.
He's a utility technician for Charlotte Water. They're pushing for a 7% raise as opposed to the 4% they're currently slated to get.
Even with a 4% raise, we still, after rent and bills, car notes, insurance, we can barely feed our families.
Charlotte City Council members are in the midst of making adjustments to that proposal, but notably, their raises would be significantly higher. Last year, council members had a base salary of $41,600. The new budget slates them for a $45,644 salary, a roughly 9.7% raise. The mayor's change is even more significant, with a 14.6% raise, bringing that position's salary to just over $57,000.
I sat through the whole budget hearing, and if we're going to be fair and transparent about where the money in the city is going, I think it should have been at least mentioned.
Cass Otley represents the City Workers Union. She was happy to see some council members support an across-the-board 7% raise to city workers. That would have included CMPD officers, who are currently slated to see a 10% raise, breaking long-standing pay equality with Charlotte Fire, who is set to get 7%. Otley says the group plans to march next week in an effort to push for more fair raises across the board.
They keep saying they value these employees, and that's great. But words are cheap when you can't pay your rent and you can't pay your bills. So we need more than words. We need fair compensation.
Next week, council will have a straw vote on some of their proposed amendments. They're expected to vote on a final budget June 8th. In Uptown, Julie Kay, WCNC Charlotte.
So since that package has aired, I got an update response from the city. They say, quote, the city benchmarks against the pay for a county commission and tries to have pay parity between the two bodies, which they say explains the more significant raises. Now, granted, most of these people have other jobs and things too adding to this, but of course, the percentages being so different, and there's less of them, of course, but the optics right now, that's why.
That's the thing. It's the optics.
Yes.
It's just, it never looks good. And
not in this tight budget cycle that we're in.
Exactly. And, you know, you talk about the city council members and specifically the mayor. It's considered a part-time job. You know as well as I know that these people do a lot more than part-time work.
Absolutely.
And you could certainly make a case that they deserve a pay raise. It's just the optics of the situation and sort of the financial situation we find ourselves in right now. I also think it would be, and I'm not advising our city officials by any means, it would also be at least perceived different if it was, say, for the next city council.
Right.
Or something like that. So it was not, they would not benefit from this own vote.
Exactly.
Sort of like they've talked about that when they've talked about extending term limits to something longer. And they talk about it being for the next council. I always feel like that's slightly more welcome and looks a little bit better because it doesn't look self-indulgent.
Right.
Again, I'm not even saying that's a fair thing. I'm just saying from an optics.
When we're thinking about
Yeah.
how people are going to respond to something like this in a very tight budget cycle when property tax is, at least for the city, is going to get raised to some degree. People are already pinching pennies as is. I think
Yeah.
that's why we're seeing the response that you saw in that interview there.
Yeah.
You know. But a lot going on. I
A lot
mean,
going on.
goodness,
Yeah.
that interview with Shannon really highlighted, for me, not just he answered, of course, some questions about what's next, but also it left me with questions about, nobody knows what's
Yeah.
coming next for some pieces of it. There are pieces that we know what happens, and then there's just the waiting and seeing from the state.
Yeah, this is the part of the show where we like to sort of be honest and candid with
Yeah.
you about our sort of reflections about the conversations we've just had. And I think for me, my takeaway is that you've got a very impressive movement, grassroots movement of people who have taken down Goliath, really. And now they've taken down Goliath.
And now what? Now what?
And now what are they going to do?
Yes.
Because I mean, it's a big job. And as I pointed out with the interview, congestion on I-77 gets worse by the day.
Yeah.
And some of the things they're talking about sound great in theory, but are years, maybe even decades away, and also require the buy-in from skeptics that aren't going to necessarily buy in. I think convincing city leaders is going to be one of the easiest things they can do.
Right. And we're still in that process.
Yeah, and
as
we're still
is.
in that process, much less the business community, much less the regional partners, much less, I mean, when you think about the transit plan we just passed last year, and how that was talked about for years and years, because the problem was not getting Charlotte people on the same page. It was getting all of our regional partners on the
Yeah.
same page and getting Republican buy-in from the General Assembly. I mean, that sort of,
Getting a bill passed. Yeah.
that took years
Yeah.
to get done.
And it was, again, another last second. We didn't know if it was going to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think people are understandably worried because we went from having what many admit is a flawed plan on I-77 to no plan and starting from scratch.
We're in this kind of just outer space floating around of what happens now. My big question, and I think that's my takeaway of the biggest question mark that's still left, is that $60 million in CDOT has already spent.
Yeah.
That's the most immediate answer I think we're going to get, because a lot of the things that he mentioned and some of the ideas that he had are things that we won't know about for a long, long time. I
Yeah.
mean, even the Austin situation, he said took 7 years to replan.
Exactly.
So some of those are a long ways down the road. Not that we can't start having those conversations now. I think the question we're going to get answered soonest is, what is the General Assembly going to do about that $60 million? When we talked to Councilman Driggs last week, he seemed to think that they're going to try and come get it.
So, yeah.
So that's going to be interesting.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us for this other edition of Flashpoint. Next week, we'll try to talk about something else besides I-77.
Unless something else happens,
We can't make
guys.
any promises, though. I can't make any
Knock on wood.
promises. Yeah, knock on wood. That's going to have to do it for us. We'll see you next week.